A Second Chance at Love. Previous episodes are available in playlist. A link is given in the video description. Episode 20. Jonathan noticed the way they looked into each other's eyes and had the sense to say nothing. Only after they retracted their gazes did he smile and say to Roxanne, "Those herb suppliers that I have contacted only have branch offices in Horrington. But they should be able to provide a consistent flow of supply to your research institute. Is that all right with you, Dr. Jarvis?" Pulling herself out of her reverie, Roxanne put on an appropriate smile. "Since they are introduced by you, I am confident of their capabilities. Furthermore, a small research institute like ours won't be requiring lots of herbs. The branch offices should be able to satisfy our demands." Raising his brows, Jonathan uttered, "It may be small now, but with you around, who knows what may happen in the future?" Roxanne smiled and did not respond. Instead, she asked, "What is the plan for the business proposal with those herb suppliers?" Right now, all she wanted was to resolve the issue before Sonia could react. Once she settled the supply issue and left the country, she would have nothing to do with the research institute. That way, Sonia would not make things difficult for them again. Jonathan answered her query, "Their main offices are in Summer Bank. It's best that you go there in person whenever you're available, Dr. Jarvis." Hearing him, Roxanne agreed in a heartbeat, "I can go there anytime. Once they confirm the time, please inform me." Jonathan nodded. Once the discussion regarding business was over, things were a bit awkward in the private room. Jonathan began to panic when he looked at the two of them. Although Roxanne did not chase Lucian away, the both of them had not spoken a single word to one another. In the end, Jonathan decided to help them. "Lucian, how has Essie been for the past 2 days?" asked Jonathan innocently as he took a mouthful of food. Both Lucian and Roxanne's expressions changed when they heard that. Not expecting Jonathan to mention Estella out of the blue, Lucian instinctively glanced at Roxanne, only to see she was busy eating. Furrowing his brows, he replied unhappily, "She's fine, but her mood has been unstable. James has been coming to see her quite frequently. Ever since Estella knew that Roxanne planned to relocate to another country, it had been bothering her. Even though Estella was trying her best to get well, her mood swings were still evident. Estella had become like that because of Roxanne, yet the latter did not seem to care about her condition." At that thought, the temperature around Lucian dropped gradually. The moment Roxanne heard Jonathan mention Estella, she tried her best to keep calm and not ask about the girl's condition. Upon hearing Lucian's reply, she felt even guiltier. Roxanne was aware she was the cause of Estella's mood swings, but she still said those harsh words to the latter. "Essie must hate me very much now." Once again, Jonathan spoke. "What exactly happened?" "Essie's condition has been stable for quite a while now. In fact, I thought she was getting better. Before we can celebrate the good news, her condition worsens again. At this rate, how is Essie ever going to make a full recovery?" As he was saying that, Jonathan cast a glance at Roxanne, who was sitting in front of him. All the mention of Estella's condition, Roxanne's heart clenched. Yet, she couldn't show it in front of Lucian. Just when she was determined to leaping indifference, Jonathan abroadiatical the subject to her. "I remember Essex like you look back when you came to rent my grandfather, "Dr. Jarvis, I wonder if her condition will improve if she spends more time with you." Allier saying that, he nonchalantly added, "I was the first time I have ever seen her showing such giver for someone else that I was shocked them." Roxanne's hand lightened around the fork in the hand. She didn't know how to tell him that she was the reason for Listella's gravened condition at the side. Lucian agreed with Jonathan and stable at her with lyrism look in his eyes. "In the past, she'd relent as long as I brought up Essek Troki, but this time, it's painfully clear that she has already hardened her heart to it all." Silence reigned at the dining table, and Roxanne could distinctly scouse the women's gazes on her. It was as though they were both forcing her to respond verily. She had no idea how the meal turned into such a crisis. A long while later, she farkikally composed herself. Then, she licked her sikes calmly and said to Jonathan, "I'm also very worried about Essie's condition. But I don't think I have that much influence over her. In terms of keeping her company, I led that Ms. Pearson is far more suited to do so. After all, they're going to be mother and haughtier in the future." As her words rang out, Jonathan was inexorably stunned. He instinctively wanted to refute that, for she was Estella's biological mother despite Aubrey wanting to be Estella's stepmother. However, he then abruptly realized that she had no inkling about it. That thought, words clouded him. And he didn't quite know how to reply to her. He glanced at the man beside him in embarrassment. Instantly Lucien heard Roxanne's answer, his sharp gaze cast into the deep shadow, and his lips curled into a mocking sneer. "Ms. Jarvis is right. Essek has nothing to do with her, so why should she help to take care of Essie?" Roxanne's expression stilled for a heartbeat when she heard that, but she ultimately didn't contradict him. At her tacit agreement, fury blazed in Lucian's eyes, noticing the tense atmosphere between the two of them. Jonathan felt a touch guilty and regretted having broached that subject. "I initially thought that Roxanne would relent slightly upon hearing about Essie's condition and decide to visit her since she's the latter's birth mother. Alas, I forgot that she's in the dark about the truth. Besides, she was the one who personally told her that she was going abroad. Therefore, she likely knows full well that she's the reason Essie is emotionally unstable. But really, I never thought that she'd be so cruel to that little girl." Following that line of thought, a scrutinizing look entered his gaze as he studied Roxanne. "I wonder if she'd regret her remark today if she were to learn the truth in the future." Regardless of his wandering mind, he still remembered to clean up the mess in his wake. He casually cleared his throat. "It was just an offhand suggestion. I forgot that you've still got to deal with the matters concerning the research institute. So you probably haven't the time anyway, Dr. Jarvis." Roxanne remained silent. Chuckling sheepishly, Jonathan raised his glass to her. "Let's not talk about this anymore. Here's to a smooth collaboration with the medicinal herb suppliers. Dr. Jarvis, I'll contact you right after they've confirmed the time." At that, Roxanne forced a smile. "Thank you for acting as the middleman, Mr. Queen." Jonathan expended a great deal of effort before he managed to smooth things over. He then kept on engaging Roxanne in conversation about the present pharmaceutical industry in Horrington. Roxanne patiently chatted with him. Meanwhile, Lucian didn't utter a single word further, merely downing his wine silently. When Jonathan glimpsed more than half the bottle of wine gone, he hastily concluded the meal. "It's late now, so let's call it a day. I'll urge the medicinal herb suppliers to finalize the time as soon as possible." Roxanne didn't want to stay any longer, so she agreed unequivocally. The three of them went downstairs side by side. Roxanne was going to foot the bill, but Jonathan stopped her from doing so. "I was merely joking back then. How could I possibly have you treat me to a meal? If my grandfather were to learn about it, he'd skin me alive." While saying that, he quickly went over to settle the bill. Subsequently, he quirked a brow smugly after walking back to Lucian. Lucian frowned without saying anything. Seeing that Jonathan had brought Alfred up, and the pittance was indeed a drop in the bucket to him, Roxanne didn't insist. By the time they left the restaurant, it was already close to 9 o'clock. Although they were all acquaintances, Roxanne had drunk quite a bit at the dinner table and was slightly buzzed. As the night breeze blew past, it sobered her up considerably. Jonathan's voice rang out beside her. "How are you going home, Dr. Jarvis? Would you like to hitch a ride with me?" In truth, Roxanne drove there. But since she had imbibed, she naturally couldn't drive home. Hearing that, Roxanne lifted her eyes and scanned the traffic. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Queen. But it's okay since my place is out of your way back to the Queen residence. I'll hail a taxi myself." After she had said that, she headed toward the side of the road. Jonathan cast a look at the man beside him. With a frown marring his countenance, Lucian stared at her fragile back in the night with a dark gaze. "It happens to be rush hour now, so it'd take eons for you to get a taxi. I'll give you a ride. Anyway, we'll be traveling by car, not on foot." Jonathan hurriedly called out to Roxanne. Roxanne halted in her steps. "It's rather inappropriate for me to turn down such a trivial offer repeatedly when he has just done me such a huge favor." Clocking her hesitance, Jonathan added, "Don't stand on ceremony with me. My grandfather specifically urged me to take good care of you when he knew that I'd be having dinner with you." Unable to decline further, Roxanne turned around and walked back to the man. She flashed him a polite smile. "My apologies for troubling you, then." Jonathan fervently waved his hands in dismissal. "Not at all. It'd only be troublesome if you'd adamantly refused to allow me to give you a ride." As he said that, he glanced at Lucian beside him meaningfully. However, Roxanne didn't catch the implicit meaning of his words. She thought he was referring to Alfred, so she merely chuckled without replying to that. And so, the three of them walked to the parking lot side by side. Only when they arrived at the parking lot did Roxanne notice that Lucian had been following them all the way. She promptly found it a tad strange. When they reached Jonathan's car, she noticed Lucian's car parked right next to it. At once, a conjecture popped into her mind. Earlier, Jonathan's so-called accidental encounter was actually just an excuse. In reality, they came together. That suspicion flashed across her mind. But on second thought, he didn't have to tell such a lie. After all, he has no idea about my relationship with Lucian, so such a ploy would be superfluous. Putting it at the back of her mind, she got into the car with Jonathan. "Mr. Farwell." When Caden saw his employer walking over with Roxanne, he subconsciously presumed that the latter would be getting into their car. Unexpectedly, he saw her getting into the car with Jonathan while Lucian stood outside. After a moment, he decided to call out to the man cautiously. His brows furrowing slightly, Lucian bent down and climbed into the car. Caden slowly started the car and drove out of the parking lot. Meanwhile, in the adjacent car, Jonathan asked Roxanne for her address and ordered the driver to drop her home first. In response, the driver murmured an acknowledgement. He moved to start the car, but it simply wouldn't start. It still didn't work after multiple tries. "The car seems to have broken down, Mr. Queen," the driver reported helplessly. Upon hearing that, Jonathan imperceptibly swept his gaze over Roxanne beside him. He wore a grim expression. "It was just fine when we came over. Why did it suddenly break down?" A conflicted expression manifested on the driver's face. I haven't been driving this car much. I didn't take it for maintenance either, so I don't know what happened. How about you wait here for a while, and I'll go back and retrieve another car before coming back to pick you up." Following that, Jonathan turned to Roxanne to seek her opinion. Roxanne similarly didn't expect such an incident. When she heard that the driver had to go to such trouble, she wavered for a while before suggesting, "My car is nearby. We can take my car. I've got to return to retrieve my car tomorrow, so it makes no difference if I go to the Queen residence instead." As soon as Jonathan heard that, his expression froze. Unbidden, a headache assailed him. "Gah! I actually forgot that she drove here. If we were to take her car, the arrangements tonight would go to waste." In the front, the driver wore a troubled expression on his face. He eyed Jonathan, waiting for the latter's instructions. Frowning, Jonathan countered solemnly. "There's no need to go to such trouble, Lucian is definitely still nearby, so we'll just ask him for a ride." At his proposal, Roxanne's brows knitted together. At the same time, disapproval stained her features. She was going to demur, but the man had already made the call. In no time, the person on the other end of the phone answered the call. Thus, she had no choice but to swallow the demurral on the tip of her tongue. "What's the matter?" Lucian's alluring voice echoed in the car. "Where are you now, Lucian? My car has seemingly broken down. Do you mind giving us a ride if you are still nearby?" Jonathan queried. On the other end of the phone, Caden tactfully slowed the car without waiting for Lucian's orders. He lifted his eyes and peered at the latter's expression. Lucian inclined his head a fraction, immediately discerning his meaning. Caden turned back around and drove toward the parking lot. "Come out. I'll meet you at the entrance of the parking lot," Lucian replied in a deep voice. Jonathan agreed with a grin. After hanging up the phone, he turned to Roxanne nonchalantly and exclaimed smilingly, "Let's go. Lucian is at the entrance of the parking lot. He'll drive past your place on his way home anyway." At long last, Roxanne had the opportunity to turn him down. "I'll just take a taxi home instead of troubling Mr. Farwell." Having said that, she swung open the car door and alighted from the car. Taken aback, Jonathan swiftly got out of the car and chased after her. Naturally, Roxanne wouldn't tell Jonathan about the matter between her and Lucian. Apart from that, however, she indeed had no reason to refuse a ride from Lucian. After mulling it over, she relented in the end. She slowed her pace and walked side by side with the man. When they reached the entrance of the parking lot, they promptly spotted Lucian a near distance away. The man was wearing a black trench coat, standing next to his car with his back ramrod straight and his eyes fixated in their direction. The instant his eyes alighted on the woman beside Jonathan, his gaze seemingly darkened imperceptibly. "Why didn't you wait in the car?" "It's so chilly," Jonathan commented casually. Lucian merely ordered, "Get in the car." Having said that, he swept his gaze over Roxanne before bending slightly and climbing into the car. Roxanne had made up her mind to hitch a ride with him. But for some inexplicable reason, a sense of apprehension slithered into her when she laid eyes on the man. Hence, she stood by the car, incapable of moving. Clocking her hesitation, Jonathan urged, "Quick, get into the car, Dr. Jarvis." Trailing behind her, he riposted, "It won't be any trouble at all since he's going the same way. Besides, I'll worry if you take a taxi alone at this hour." Roxanne's brows creased. Just when she was about to decline again, the man abruptly remarked meaningfully, "By the way, the atmosphere between you and Lucian seemed off at the dinner table earlier. I remember that everything was fine when I last saw you with him. Are you both keeping some secret from me? Did he do something to you?" Roxanne snapped back to her senses. Hoping to keep him from noticing any oddity, she nodded impassively and headed toward the passenger seat. Since she had no choice but to sit in the same car with Lucian, she wanted to minimize her contact with him as much as possible. Unfortunately, Jonathan had already opened the passenger door when she made to head over and declared, "It'll be too cramped with two men sitting in the back. Make do with Lucian, Dr. Jarvis." Right after saying that, he bent down and slid into the passenger seat. In a flash, Roxanne was the only one left standing outside the car. She stared at the back seat, caught between a rock and a difficult place. She wasn't sure whether she was overthinking things, but everything that happened that night seemed too much of a coincidence. Jonathan was behaving very strangely as well. It was as though he had planned everything. If she hadn't known that the man had no idea about her relationship with Lucian, she was almost positive that it was all his scheme. After standing outside for several seconds, Roxanne bit the bullet and circled over. Swinging open the car door, she got into the car. When she had settled in, she reflexively glanced at the man beside her. Lucian seemed to have imbibed a little too much. He appeared rather indolent as he reclined against the seat with a hand propped against his temple languidly. His eyes were closed lightly, and he didn't react to her getting into the car. Seeing that, Roxanne surreptitiously breathed a sigh of relief. She did her best to stick as close to the car window as possible to keep her distance from him. The car then started moving slowly. Roxanne furtively rejoiced that she would be alighting from the car before Jonathan so things wouldn't be overly awkward. Unexpectedly, Jonathan exclaimed out of the blue when the car passed an intersection, "I suddenly remember that I've got something to do nearby. Just drop me off here." When Roxanne heard that, her heart instantly clenched. "It's still a distance away from my place, so I'd have no choice but to face Lucian if he were to get out of the car here." At that thought, the urge to do the same seized her. Regretfully, that would appear too deliberate. While she was still hesitating, Jonathan had already opened the car door and climbed out of the car. He even prompted Lucian. "I'm entrusting Dr. Jarvis to you. Make sure to drive her home safely." Lucian nodded non-committally. Then, Jonathan said to Roxanne with a smile, "Remember to text me when you arrive home so that I can put my grandfather's mind at ease, Dr. Jarvis." Roxanne murmured her acquiescence stiffly. When the car door had closed, the car continued driving slowly. Dead silence reigned in the car. One could sense that the atmosphere was entirely different from when Jonathan was present earlier, giving off a sense of an impending storm. Roxanne was sitting straight, her gaze trained right ahead. She tried her best to ignore the man beside her. She wasn't sure whether she was imagining things, but his piercing gaze seemingly locked on her since Jonathan alighted from the car. It had her tensing up subconsciously. All of a sudden, Lucian's voice rang out beside her. "Have I offended you in any way, Ms. Jarvis?" Relief suffused Roxanne when she heard his voice. She flashed him a detached smile. "Why would you say that, Mr. Farwell?" Lucian eyed her with a dark look, his voice threaded with displeasure. "If that's not the case, why are you avoiding me thus, Ms. Jarvis?" Frowning slightly, Roxanne feigned ignorance. "When have I avoided you, Mr. Farwell? Precisely speaking, I don't have much of a chance to meet you since our work doesn't intersect. In other words, they didn't have a personal relationship besides a professional association. In fact, they even had no interaction at work. They had no opportunity to meet anyway, so avoiding him made no sense." The moment her words rang out, the temperature in the car plummeted. While driving, Caden cautiously stole a peek at the two people at the back through the rearview mirror. Inwardly, he worried on Roxanne's behalf. Why is Ms. Jarvis provoking Mr. Farwell when she knows full well that he's in a bad mood now? As he was fretting, he noticed Lucian lowering the partition in the back seat. He silently retracted his gaze, not daring to observe the situation in the back anymore. When Roxanne saw Lucian lowering the partition without warning, her heart lurched. She instinctively twisted sideways and plastered her back against the car window to put some distance between them. Glimpsing that, Lucian narrowed his eyes in chagrin and questioned icily. "Roxanne Jarvis, why are you shying away from me in such a manner? How when you said I hadn't offended you in any way? Are you afraid that I'd bite?" A frown marred Roxanne's countenance, and faint wariness showed in her eyes. In a distant tone, she explained, "I merely feel that we're not that close with each other, and your action was rather sudden to me, Mr. Farwell." At the sight of her wary expression, Lucian smirked scornfully. "What do you think I'm planning to do?" Roxanne said nothing, but their kiss at the hotel when they first bumped into each other after her return to the country flashed across her mind. "That was the only time he took the initiative with me since we got acquainted. Alas, it was when I no longer needed it." The current situation was inexplicably similar to the circumstances back then. Lucian stared at her with a dark look, a storm brewing in his eyes. Ever since we parted ways at the cafe back then, she had been avoiding me. That aside, she even had her housekeeper send Archie and Benny to the kindergarten and pick them up. It's only today that I've got a chance to see her again, thanks to Jonathan making up an excuse. But she has been distancing herself from me the entire night, unwilling to even utter a single word to me. He initially thought he could understand her thoughts, but he merely felt livid after seeing her for real and experiencing her treatment of him. His plan had been to vent by drinking, but the alcohol coursing through his veins was only fanning the flames within him. Roxanne could distinctly sense the oppressiveness in the car intensifying. Her hands by her side unconsciously balled into fists, her nails digging into her palms as she forcefully suppressed the panic within her. "Please stop acting in such a manner, Mr. Farwell. We're merely strangers, so this is bothering me." Feigning calmness, Roxanne scowled at the man before her. The instant her words rang out, an indecipherable smile bloomed on Lucian's face. In the next second, his cold voice echoed in the car. "Strangers? Ah, it turns out that you have no qualms treating a stranger to a meal and getting into a stranger's car, Ms. Jarvis. But since that's what you think, Ms. Jarvis, I don't mind getting familiar with you." Roxanne wanted to decline, but when she lifted her eyes, she saw that the man was already mere centimeters away from her. In the cramped space, Lucian's broad figure carried such an immense sense of oppression that she had difficulty breathing. "What are you doing?" Roxanne regarded the man in front of her warily. Lucian smirked unhurriedly. "I just want to introduce myself to you, Ms. Jarvis." At that, Roxanne rebuffed frostily, "I don't want to listen to it. Nor do I think there's any need for us to be familiar with each other." However, Lucian allowed her no room to decline. Ignoring her, he started, "My name is Lucian Farwell, and I'm presently the CEO of Farwell Group. I was once married 6 years ago." Hearing that, Roxanne seemingly suffered a blow and dipped her eyes in panic. Alas, Lucian grasped her chin firmly and forced her head up. Staring right into her eyes, he continued, "Coincidentally, my ex-wife shares your name. Her name is also Roxanne Jarvis. However, she ran off without a word, leaving a divorce agreement behind. I searched for her for 6 whole years. I suppose you know her whereabouts, Ms. Jarvis." Lucian's grasp tightened all the more. Such pain racked Roxanne from his grip that she almost suspected her chin would shatter soon. The man's voice started growing muffled. When she heard his last 2 utterances, her pupils constricted. She couldn't quite believe her ears either. "He'd searched for me for 6 years? But why? Why would he look for me? Hadn't he been hoping to marry Aubrey? Thus, didn't my departure suit him just right? But then, his marriage to her has stagnated at an engagement in these whole years. Hi, is that se?" As she was at a loss, Lucian sensed her distraction. His grasp on her increased in strength once more. In pain, Roxanne automatically grunted. Unfortunately, Lucian turned a deaf ear to it. Instead, he resumed speaking. "I also have a daughter, whose name is Estella Farwell. She has been suffering from severe autism since young. There's this woman she likes a lot, who's also known as Roxanne Jarvis. These days, she even had a recurrence because of that woman. Don't you think that we're very much connected by destiny, Ms. Jarvis?" At the mention of Estella, Roxanne fell into a trance. "He knows all of my sore spots and is rubbing salt on them with every single word out of his mouth, from our marriage in name 6 years ago to Essie, who's having a recurrence now because of me. A wave of guilt flooded her at the thought of Estella. Her gaze gradually softened as well. Noticing that she was spacing out again, Lucian increased his force in disgruntlement. Roxanne jolted back to reality in a flash. Gritting her teeth, she lifted her hand and grabbed his wrist, struggling wildly. "Let go of me, Lucian. Have you lost your mind?" The corners of Lucian's mouth turned up in a smirk. "It looks like my self-introduction was pretty good that you've committed my name to memory so quickly, Ms. Jarvis." Roxanne was wholly baffled to hear that. When she glimpsed the dark look on the man's face, fear surged within her. She felt as though he would devour her in the next heartbeat. Roxanne made every effort to calm herself down. She met Lucian's gaze calmly and stated gently, "With you acting in such a manner now, Lucian, I'll only find you even more of a stranger." As far as she remembered, he had always been calm and unruffled. In fact, he was rather apathetic. At least, that was his personality 6 years ago. At present, he had become unfathomable to her. Perhaps that comment of hers worked, for she sensed the grip on her chin seemingly relaxing gradually. She held her breath. A while later, Lucian withdrew his hand and sat back in his seat. He gazed at her with a complex look in his eyes. "What exactly do you want?" That question rang out before Roxanne could breathe a sigh of relief. At once, bewilderment swamped her. "It should be me asking him that. I've already made my stance clear as day. What exactly does he want? Never mind that you're avoiding me, but you're not even visiting Essie anymore. Are you really this callous, Roxanne?" Lucian pinned a sharp look on her. Roxanne's heart sank slightly. Closing her eyes for a moment, she suppressed the strange feeling within her and drawled indifferently. "Let's not talk about this anymore when it's meaningless anyway. Since my presence in the car is upsetting you so greatly, Mr. Farwell, I think I should just get out of the car." After saying that, she lifted her hand to tap on the partition and signal Caden to pull over. No sooner had she stretched out her hand than the man grabbed her wrist forcefully. Roxanne struggled to break free from his hold. "If you really want to talk, Mr. Farwell, we can set a time and talk someplace else. I'm very uncomfortable in this space right now." In that cramped space, she couldn't shake off the feeling that she was powerless to resist, no matter what Lucian did to her. Following that thought, terror crept into her eyes as she stared at the man. Sensing her fear, Lucian narrowed his eyes a fraction. He slowly released his grip on her wrist and questioned through gritted teeth, "You're afraid of me? What's to fear about me? What have I done to hurt you?" He initially felt that it was already infuriating that she was distancing herself from him. However, her terror of him then hit him like a bucket of cold water. A bone-piercing chill spread from the depths of his heart. Never had he wanted her to fear him. Conversely, Roxanne's expression gradually turned chilly from his repeated harassment. "Don't you find yourself ridiculous, Mr. Farwell? Hasn't it been your wish to marry Ms. Pearson? Now that the two of you are getting married, you should somewhat take her feelings into consideration and keep your distance from other women. Especially me, since I'm your ex-wife." Lucian's brows scrunched together slightly. Verily, he didn't expect her to mention their relationship 6 years ago. Meanwhile, Roxanne merely felt that it was better for her to put things in the open when things had gotten to that point. I'm going abroad sooner or later anyway and won't have much contact with him anymore. If Ms. Pearson were to learn that you're being so familiar with me, Mr. Farwell, I'm afraid that there'd be some unnecessary misunderstanding. I hope you won't put me in a difficult position anymore. You think I'm putting you in a difficult position? Lucian countered coldly. At that, Roxanne's lips curved into a self-deprecating smirk. Otherwise, you can also interpret it as my reluctance to repeat my mistakes 6 years ago. No one wants to fall into the same trap twice. In other words, she was telling the man that she wouldn't accept him even if he really had feelings for her. The incident 6 years ago had already hurt her deeply, and she didn't want history repeating itself. As Lucian recalled her conversation with his mother at the cafe that day, his heart abruptly sank. I reckon Mr. Unspoken told you about the incident that befall my research institute this time. And I'm sure you know the culprit behind it, Mr. Farwell, Roxanne stated. Blondie, she continued, despite having avoided you such, Mrs. Farwell still misunderstood things. As you can see, all she needed to do was to say a few words. Consequently, not only had my small research institute been plunged into turmoil, but it might not even be able to survive in Horrington. I only came back this time because of the research institute. So I don't want any other trouble, nor can I afford to be embroiled in any. Therefore, please be considerate of my predicament, Mr. Farwell. Her words were like a dagger, stabbing Lucian right in the heart. In truth, that was also the reason he allowed her to avoid him recently. He didn't want to see her getting into unnecessary trouble because of him. When he was being personally reminded of that fact. However, a peculiar feeling rose within him. He was both anguished about her predicament and regretful that he ultimately wasn't firm enough with his mother, failing to protect her. Roxanne didn't want to continue further, nor had she the strength to do so. She merely stated, "Please have Mr. Lawson pull over, Mr. Farwell. We're now close enough to my house that I can take a taxi home." Lucian was silent for a long moment. In the end, he raised the partition and ordered Caden to pull over in a tense voice. Caden found it strange, but he also knew there must have been some conflict between his boss and Roxanne. Surprisingly, it was Lucian who relented. At the man's orders, he pulled over at the nearest intersection. After thanking the man detachedly, Roxanne opened the car door and alighted from the car. "Are we leaving, Mr. Farwell?" Caden inquired cautiously upon seeing that the woman had gone a distance away. Lucian said nothing, his gaze fixated on Roxanne at the side of the road in the distance. Indeed, it was difficult to hail a taxi at that hour. Roxanne waited a long time by the roadside before she managed to get a taxi. Opening the car door, she climbed into the taxi. When Caden received no response from Lucian after a while, he naturally knew why the man was waiting, seeing that Roxanne had gotten into the taxi. He asked once more, "Where are we going, Mr. Farwell?" "Follow the taxi," Lucian instructed tersely. Although Roxanne's every word angered him, he couldn't help worrying over her. In time and murmuring in acknowledgement, Caden started the car and followed behind the taxi at a moderate distance. "Lance!" He trailed it all the way to Roxanne's mansion and watched as the latter alighted from the taxi and entered the mansion before turning around and merging into the traffic, driving toward the Farwell residence. By the time Roxanne arrived home, it was already close to 10 o'clock. Due to her stalemate with Lucian earlier, weariness was written all over her face. Archie and Benny had been waiting for her downstairs. When they caught sight of her stepping into the house, they immediately trotted over in concern. "Mommy! You look exceedingly tired. Is the problem with the research institute very tricky?" Forcing a smile, Roxanne patted their heads in reassurance. "I'm fine. I'm just a touch sleepy." Benny took the jacket she removed. Just when he was going to hang it up, he found the smell clinging to it somewhat familiar. "This seems to be Daddy's smell." He instinctively scrutinized Roxanne. Exhausted physically and mentally, Roxanne didn't notice his abnormality. She apologized to them in a gentle voice, murmuring, "Sorry I came home so late. It's late now, so I'll take you both upstairs to rest." Failing to perceive anything amiss about her, Benny frowned in puzzlement. Considering the smell, Mommy must have met up with Daly. It was already late in the night when Lucian returned to the Farwell residence. Estella had already fallen asleep a long while ago. Lucian's heart ached when he was reminded of how Roxanne had completely avoided mentioning Estella just now. He went upstairs to Estella's room. The Ligule girl had a serene sleeping posture. She lay on her side with half her face covered with blanket, seemingly sound asleep. Lucian's gaze softened at the sight of his daughter. He lifted his arm and patted her head. Then, he tucked her in before getting up and left. Just when he reached the door, he suddenly heard a sound behind him as if Estella was sobbing. He stopped abruptly in his tracks, turned on his heels, and returned to her bedside. Lucian gently pulled away the blanket covering Estella's face and saw her brows furrowed, eyes shut, and beads of tears staining her long eyelashes. He wondered what kind of nightmare she was experiencing. Lucian felt sorrowful when he saw her daughter in that state. He raised his hand, wanting to wipe the tears off Estella's face. However, at that moment, she muttered in her sleep, "Ms. Jarvis. Don't go." Jarvis, Lucian frowned upon hearing that. In the past few days, he left right after coaxing Estella to sleep. Even when he checked in on her in the middle of the night, he merely glanced if Estella had kicked her blanket away before turning to leave. He glanced at her weary face again, lunately swallowing the question on the tip of his tongue. Judging from her look, it must have been unpleasant, even if that's the case. Hence, asking her about it will only upset her. After hanging up the jacket, he obediently followed Roxanne upstairs to rest. "How many times has Essie experienced similar dreams without my knowledge? Essie misses Roxanne so much." Yet, Roxanne was so merciless. She was completely unfazed even when she heard of Essie's condition. All that thought, Lucian felt the temperature around him dropped. Estella seemed to be frightened by him in her sleep because she suddenly started bawling. He snapped back to his senses, carefully carried Estella, who was still wrapped in the blanket, and clumsily pulled her back. "It's all right, Essie, Daddy is here." However, Estella counted to cry her eyes out. "No. Don't go." "Boo-hoo," Lucian's frown deepened as he listened to Estella's wails. How could I not hear her if this is how loudly she cries? Just when he was blaming himself for his lack of attentiveness, Estella woke up. He groggily hugged his neck, staining Lucian's clothes with her tears. Lucian did not mind. He asked with concern, "Don't cry, Essie. Daddy is here. Tell me. What did you dream about?" Estella had yet to recollect herself as she whimpered Roxanne, Archie, and Benny's names. Needless to say, she had dreamt of the scene when Roxanne, Archie, and Benny left. Lucian could not bring himself to probe Estella further. He tightened his arms around her in an embrace. After a long while, she was finally wide awake. She pushed herself away from him by supporting her tiny arms on Lucian's shoulder. He freed one of his arms to wipe the tears off her face. "Did you dream of Ms. Jarvis?" She nodded in grievances. Estella had a dream about Roxanne, Archie, and Benny boarding a plane. She called them, but they ignored her, so she had no choice but to chase after their plane. However, Estella failed to catch up with them and even tripped over. When she was reminded of the scenes in her dreams, Lucian knitted his brows in confusion at that sight. Essie did not meet with Roxanne recently, nor did she dream about her previously. Why is she having this dream now and crying so badly today? Archie and Benny told me Ms. Jarvis will take them overseas once she is done with her work at the research estate. Estella was crestfallen when she recalled her conversation with Archie and Benny at the kindergarten yesterday. She thought Roxanne was merely lying to her previously, and Archie and Benny also told her they would not be leaving. However, the two kids informed Estella that they would not stay much longer in the country. Moreover, since Roxanne told Estella she would be going abroad, Estella had not seen the latter. With that thought in mind, Estella could not contain her urge to shed tears again. Hearing his daughter's words, Lucian's face gradually darkened. According to Archie and Benny, Roxanne would have been abroad now if it weren't for this incident. Estella tugged at the hem of her father's shirt and uttered in a childish voice. Estella's eyes reddened again. "Be good. Ms. Jarvis has yet to leave. I just met with her just now." Lucian tried his best to suppress his dissatisfaction toward Roxanne and tenderly comforted his daughter. Estella leaned closer to him doubtfully and took a sniff with her nose wrinkled. Her face gradually slackened when she caught a while of Roxanne's body door on Lucian. Lucian asked again in concern. "Do you have this kind of dream every night, Essie?" She pursed her lips and shook her head. "Daddy, I am reluctant to see Ms. Jarvis go." Lucian pulled himself back to reality and held her daughter's unified hands. He consoled her, "I know. I'll have a good talk with Ms. Jarvis." Estella nodded. Her eyes glazed over as she let out a yawn. Lucian placed Estella on the bed and tucked her in. "Go to sleep. I'll stay here and keep you company." Her head lolled to the side, and she dozed off after lying on the bed for a short while. Complicated moutons churned within Lucian as he took in his daughter's calm sleeping face while pondering on her words earlier. After Estella was sound asleep, Lucian tiptoed out of the room and retimed to his bedroom. When he was done washing up and was ready to sleep, it was already past midnight. Early the next morning, Lucian suffered from an intense headache. Caden was already waiting for him at the entrance of Lucian's other when the latter arrived. Caden hurried forward at the sight of his boss. "Mr. Farwell. Lucian nodded and replied in a hoarse voice, "What's the matter?" Caden took out a document and dipped to a page before showing it to Lucian. "There are some minor problems with our project at Summer Bank. The people at Summer Bank are requesting a person in charge from our side to make a trip there in person. However, Mr. Langdon has been handling another project recently, so he's currently unable to leave his post. What do you think?" Lucian received the document and took a glance. The issue with the project was not something serious. Assigning a project manager to Summer Bank would have been sufficient. However, Lucian had a different idea when he named the meeting place arranged by the other party. He said to Caden, "I'll get back to you in a short while." Caden replied affirmatively. Upon entering his office, Lucian took out his phone and contacted Jonathan. Meanwhile, Jonathan had just confirmed the meeting time with medicinal herb suppliers at Summer Bank and was about to ring Roxanne. Lucian called him all of a sudden. Jonathan answered the call instantly. "That matter you mentioned yesterday about deciding a time to meet with the medicinal herb suppliers from Summer Bank, have you finalized the details?" "If you haven't," Lucian uttered solemnly. Jonathan interjected Lucian cheerful why amidst the latter's speech, "You are more impatient than Dr. Jarvis. Even she has not urged me regarding this matter." Lucian grunted in response. "I just finalized the time and was about to call Dr. Jarvis," Jonathan said. Lucian probed further after hearing that. "When is the date?" Jonathan cast a look at the calendar. 2 days later. Why?" Lucian nodded. "I got it." Then, he hung up the call without offering Jonathan any explanation. After that, Lucian summoned Caden to his office. "Book me a flight to Summer Bank tomorrow. I'm making a trip there personally." Caden gazed at his boss as he was confused. He merely consulted Lucian for his opinion on that matter earlier because Lucian had to make the decision. Caden was well aware that judging by the severity of the issue that arose at the Summer Bank project, Lucian did not need to go there personally. Nonetheless, since Lucian had given the order, Caden did not dare to question him and swiftly agreed to proceed to make the subsequent arrangements. After hanging up the phone, Jonathan rang Roxanne right away. Roxanne picked up the phone very quickly and asked, "Mr. Queen, did the medicinal herb suppliers set up Acme to meet already?" Jonathan smiled and answered, "Yes. They're hoping to meet up and discuss the details in 2 days' time. However, it depends on whether you'll be free by then." The biggest issue the research institute had was the supply of medicinal herbs. Naturally, Roxanne prioritized the meeting and agreed to meet them without any hesitation. "I'll be free. Please let them know I'll show up on time. You don't have to prepare anything. Once you've arrived, there'll be someone there to fetch you," Jonathan answered. In response, Roxanne said, "Thank you, Mr. Queen. Thank you for your help." Jonathan smiled and replied, "No worries. You've done a lot in curing my grandpa back then." After all, considering the relationship between Roxanne and Lucian, he felt as though it was his duty to help out. At the same time, Jonathan tried to help Lucian by mentioning him in the conversation. "Besides, Lucian had already called me and asked me to hurry up. Hence, it's only right for me to put more effort into this." Hearing that, Roxanne fell silent, and she recalled what had happened the night before. According to Jonathan, Lucian still seems to be worried about matters concerning my research institute. Didn't I make myself clear last night? Besides, I've already told him Sonia is behind it. What is he up to now? After Gailong no response from her, Jonathan knew he had wasted his effort once again. He cleared his throat and said, "Since my job is done, I'll keep an ear out for your good news in 2 days' time." Roxanne pursed her lips and smiled. "If everything goes smoothly, I'll visit you and thank you again." They ended the call after exchanging some pleasantries. Jonathan was puzzled when he thought about how Roxanne had reacted when he mentioned Lucian. "I've already planned everything out thoroughly last night, no? I've given them the perfect opportunity to be alone with each other. Why is Roxanne's attitude toward Lucian still the same? What happened between the both of them? A fire I left last night. Now, the only issue left with the research institute is the supply of medicinal ingredients." Roxanne heaved a sigh of relief after hearing those words from Jonathan. After ending the call, Jonathan texted Roxanne the details of he medicinal herb suppliers in Summer Bank. Roxanne got Colby to help her look through the details that day and came up with a business proposal. All that was left was meeting them in Summer Bank. When Roxanne arrived home that evening, she looked rather relaxed compared to 2 days before. Archie and Benny grew anxious when they saw how relaxed Roxanne was. During dinner, Benny poked the food on his plate absent-minded and asked grumpily, "Mommy, are you almost done with the matters concerning the research institute?" Roxanne nodded. "I'm going to Summer Bank in 2 days. If everything goes smoothly, the problem will be solved. In other words, they could be leaving the country soon." Archie and Benny's faces fell after they exchanged glances with each other. "Must we leave the country?" Roxanne acquiesced silently. She knew Archie and Benny were reluctant to leave Estella behind, and she was feeling the same way too. However, she started feeling uneasy again after she recalled how imposing Lucian was the night before. "If we stay here, who knows what's going to happen in the future?" 2 days later, Roxanne how to COMM Bank Carly in the morning, according to the agreed uses Jonathan said. The moment she arrived, someone was already there waiting for her. Roxanne introduced herself before following the person out of the airport. After geeing in the car, the diver asked respectfully, "Mr. Ziegler had already booked you a hotel room. Would you like me to send you to the hotel, or would you like to go to the office first?" Roxanne didn't bring anything with her, so she answered, "If Mr. Ziegler is free now, perhaps we should go to his office first." She just wanted to get it done with as soon as possible. The driver nodded in acknowledgement and immediately drove toward the office. When they were on the way there, he had also called Jasper Ziegler to keep him posted. When Roxanne arrived, Jasper was already waiting for her in his office. "Hi, Dr. Jarvis. I've heard a lot about you." Jasper got up and reached out his hand for a handshake the moment he saw her. Roxanne shook his hand and greeted him politely in response. After exchanging some pleasantries, Roxanne decided to cut to the chase. "Mr. Ziegler, the reason I'm here today is..." Jasper interrupted her speech and said, "I know. You're here to talk about the possibility of working together. There's no rush, though. After all, I'm not the only party who is interested." Roxanne was stumped when she heard that. She thought Jasper had changed his mind, so she hesitated for a while before saying, I've already prepared the proposal. Would you like to look through it first? We can always make adjustments based on your requests. Jasper smiled and waved his hand dismissively. You've misunderstood what I meant. Since Mr. Queen introduced you to us, we won't go back on our words. What I mean is that our company is holding a banquet tonight, and I was hoping that you could join us. Representatives from the other companies will be there as well. Roxanne heaved a sigh of relief. However, she was still hesitant. Oh, I see. I can wait. About the banquet, she had never worked with Jasper's company before. So she thought it would be awkward if she were to crash the party. Jasper didn't know what was on her mind, so he continued to persuade her by saying, according to Mr. Queen, you're well known across the globe, Dr. Jarvis. We would be honored to have you there. Besides, prominent figures from all over the country in the pharmaceutical industry will attend the banquet. Perhaps you could even build your contacts when you meet them. By attending the banquet, we'll both reap the benefits. Before Jonathan recommended Roxanne to him, Jasper had already asked about Roxanne's background. He knew how well she did during the medical conference back then. Coincidentally, a lot of prominent figures in the pharmaceutical industry were expected to attend the banquet. He thought most of them would know Roxanne. That was why Jasper wanted her there. If I can get her to attend, not only will I be able to show the guests how connected I am, but I can also show my appreciation toward Jonathan and Roxanne. Upon hearing that, Roxanne had no choice but to accept the invitation. Since you've already said so, I shall attend the banquet, Mr. Ziegler. I'll bring the documents with me when I go over in the evening. Jasper immediately rejected that suggestion of hers by saying, that's not necessary. We'll just have a discussion with everyone else tonight, okay? Let's not be so formal. Since you're not in a hurry, we can go over the agreement tomorrow. Roxanne hesitated briefly before agreeing to his suggestion. Jasper told Roxanne the time and place for the banquet before getting the driver to send her back to the hotel. Meanwhile, despite being in Lovington, Jonathan had also received an invitation from Jasper. Since Jonathan was busy with Queen Group, he couldn't attend the banquet. However, he thought of Lucian and guessed that Lucian would be interested in attending. After getting off the phone with Jasper, Jonathan called Lucian right away. The moment the call went through, Lucian asked, "Is Roxanne here already?" Hearing that, Jonathan froze momentarily. He then smiled playfully and answered, "She is. Besides, Dr. Jarvis' paternal business partner in Summer Bank had invited her to the banquet, and she had agreed to attend." Upon hearing Tai, Lucian furrowed his brows slightly and answered in a deep voice, "Got it." With that, he hung up the phone before Jonathan could say anything. A teasing smile appeared on Jonathan's face as his phone's screen dimmed. Although Lucian didn't say it out loud, he knew Lucian was surely going to be at the banquet. In Summer Bank, someone knocked on Lucian's door after he hung up the phone. Farwell Group's business partner in Summer Bank walked in with a smile on his face. "Mr. Farwell, would you like to go through our contract?" he asked. Lucian's business partners in Summer Bank felt rather helpless because they were the ones who known the mistakes made by Farwell Group in the first place. Hence, they thought they could take advantage of it. However, they didn't expect Lucian to show up personally. Not only did they fail to take advantage of the mistakes made, but they ended up facing countless requests from Lucian. They almost lost the chance to work with Farwell Group. Throughout the past couple of days, Lucian had been cooperative, but he remained dubious about working with them. Hence, the person in charge took the initiative and humbly altered all the terms in the contract to Lucian's request. However, they solely couldn't get Lucian to sign the contract. At the same time, they weren't willing to lose Farwell Group as a business partner. Even if they were to not make a profit out of the deal, they were certain that they could improve the company's reputation based solely on the fact that they had worked together with Farwell Group. Despite Lucian's attitude toward the deal, they were glad that he hadn't rejected them yet. In other words, there was still a chance for the deal to go through. With the slimmest of hope in their minds, the person in charge of the project had been consulting Lucian on a daily basis to gauge his opinions. That day, Lucian had one of his hands in his pocket, and he was looking down at the person in charge. The person in charge hung his head low, and he seemed to be cautious of his own actions. Although he solely hadn't gotten an answer from Lucian, the person in charge didn't dare to rush him. From what I heard, your company is quite prominent in Summer Bank, right? Lucian asked. The person in charge answered hurriedly. Our company is ranked first in the industry we're involved in. With that, he looked at Lucian warily because he was worried that Lucian had found another business partner to work with. In response, Lucian nodded in satisfaction and said, I heard that Ziegler Group is organizing a banquet tonight. Is your company going to attend? Upon hearing that, the person in charge answered subconsciously. Our company isn't involved in the pharmaceutical industry, so Ziegler Group didn't invite us. As soon as he finished the sentence, he could feel Lucian looking at him doubtfully. The person in charge immediately regained his senses, and he ulstered, that being said, I'm sure Ziegler Group would invite us if we were to ask them about it. Lucian nodded. Get your boss to show up with the contract tonight. In other words, Lucian had agreed to sign the contract with them during the banquet. That left the person in charge all thrilled. He quickly agreed to the request and went back to inform the higher UPS about Lucian's demand. Roxanne thought she was just there to sign the contract, and she didn't expect to be invited to a banquet. Since she was dealing with a potential business partner, she thought it would be disrespectful for her to show up wearing a suit. After giving it some thought, Roxanne gave Madeline a call. Madeline picked up the call fairly quickly, and she asked. What's up, Roxanne? Aren't you in Summer Bank for work? A day before she went to Summer Bank, Roxanne had asked Madeline to help her take care of Archie and Benny. Madeline thought Roxanne was worried about Archie and Benny because of the sudden phone call, so she said, Don't worry, okay? I've already sent Archie and Benny to the kindergarten, and I watched them go in. Roxanne chuckled and answered, With you in charge, I'm not worried. I just want to know if you know of any boutiques in Summer Bank. I'm attending a banquet this evening. Hearing that, Madeline raised her brows in puzzlement. Aren't you there to sign a contract? How did you end up getting invited to a banquet? In a helpless tone, Roxanne answered, It's a request from the potential business partner, and it wouldn't be nice of me to turn him down. Let me know if you know of any boutiques, okay? This is my first time visiting Summer Bank, and I don't know much about this place. Madeline didn't press her with further questions. She thought about it for a while and said, "If I'm not mistaken, the Lane family has a branch there. Look around and see if you can find them. I think the boutique is called Neon Boutique as well. I'll give their person in charge a call." Having hosted throughout Chania for the past 4 years, Madeline had made a lot of friends. And she knew some of the younger members of the Lane family. Upon hearing that the boutique belonged to the Lane family, Roxanne appeared slightly hesitant. The Farwell family and the Lane family are close. Since I'm avoiding the Farwell family, I've also been avoiding all the prestigious families they're associated with. However, I had no choice but to work with Queen Group. Madeline wasn't aware of Roxanne's worries, so she said, "I think they require customers to make reservations before going over. Wait a while, okay? Till make some calls and see it I can help you cut the queue." With that, she hung up the phone. Roxanne didn't reject the idea because she thought she wouldn't meet anyone from the Farwell family in a small boutique owned by the Lane family. Soon after that, Madeline called her and said, "I've already made an appointment for you. Just mention my name when you arrive, okay? I need to attend to something, so I'm going to hang up now." As soon as Roxanne acknowledged it, Madeline had already hung up the phone. Seeing that it was getting late, Roxanne went to have a simple lunch before going to Neon Boutique in a taxi. When she arrived at Neon Boutique, it was already 1 in the afternoon. Roxanne mentioned Madeline's name. And true enough, someone came to bring her in right away. Roxanne picked an elegant look and took a seat while waiting for the stylist quietly. She wasn't sure if it was just her imagination, but she thought she had heard Lucian's voice while she waited. Roxanne only heard the voice for a split second, so she didn't think too much about it. In the meantime, the person in charge of Neon Boutique in Summer Bank was following Lucian from behind when he said respectfully, "Mr. Farwell, our head stylist is already waiting for you upstairs." Lucian nodded nonchalantly. "Thanks." His business partner did well. Although they didn't know why he wanted to join Ziegler Group's banquet, they contacted Ziegler Group as fast as they could and managed to get their hands on 2 invitations. Lucian wasn't prepared to attend a banquet, so he didn't bring the clothes he needed. Hence, he called someone from the Lane family before going to Neon Boutique. The hairstyle and makeup Roxanne picked was simple, so the stylist was done with her fairly quickly. She then picked a dress and went to got changed while the stylist waited for her outside the changing room. When he saw Roxanne coming out of the changing room, he was blown away. "Miss, the dress fits you like it was made for you." He had been a stylist for years, and he had rarely seen someone picking such a simple look in Neon Boutique. Before he did her makeup, he noticed how pretty she looked. However, she had only picked a simple look, so the stylist didn't have a high expectation of how she would look when they were done. To his surprise, he was utterly blown away by Roxanne's beauty when he saw her. A bunch of Roxanne's hair was pinned into a simple bun behind her head with a simple pearl hairpin, and the rest of her hair was casually draped behind her head. With her light makeup, she was able to showcase her facial features. The makeup artist had even taken the initiative to put on some lip gloss on her lips. She was dressed in a white evening gown that exposed her shoulders. Her exposed skin was flawless, and her collarbone was alluring. In fact, she looked like an angel from heaven. If it weren't for the fact that people who would come to Neon Boutique for styling were rich and powerful, the stylist would have recommended her to join the entertainment industry and be a star. Upon receiving the stylist's praises, Roxanne simply smiled and answered, "Thank you." Roxanne then checked herself out in the mirror and nodded in satisfaction. "This is good. It's not too fancy, but it's enough to show my appreciation for the invitation." Roxanne turned to thank the stylist once again before heading downstairs to make payment. After Expunge Neon Boutique, Roxanne realized it was about time to attend the banquet. Hence, she wanted to walk toward the side of the road to hail a taxi. Right then, she heard a voice coming from behind her. "Goodbye, Mr. Farwell," the Neon Boutique's pre-sale in charge saint politely when he sent Lucian out. Lucian nodded slightly before taming around. That was when she saw a lady standing by the side of the road. He recognized Roxanne just by looking at her back. Roxanne heard the person in charge clearly, and her endure being Suitland instantly. Right after that, Roxanne wanted to get out of there as soon as she could. Seeing that, Lucian's gaze darkened, and he quickly went up to her. "What a coincidence, Ms. Jarvis." When she heard those words, Roxanne immediately halted in her tracks, and she was stumped. How could there be such a coincidence? Why is Lucian here? Also, why would he still call out to me after what I said? On the other hand, Lucian was also caught by surprise. Who would have known that when I was getting ready upstairs, she had been downstairs all along? I thought we'll only meet during the banquet. However, it's not such a bad thing to bump into her before the event. Lucian wasn't bothered by the fact that Roxanne didn't respond. He then approached her and stood beside her before asking in a deep voice, "You're all dressed up, Ms. Jarvis. Are you attending the banquet? Were you planning on getting into a taxi dressed like that?" Roxanne frowned slightly and took 2 steps backward to create a distance from him. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Farwell. You must be a busy man. I shouldn't take up your time." With that, she turned around to leave. Lucian looked stunned when he caught a glimpse of Roxanne. In the next second, he realized that she was trying to get away from him. Lucian's gaze darkened, and he suddenly reached out his hand to grab Roxanne's wrist. Roxanne halted in her tracks and turned around to shoot him a wary look. Lucian then uttered authoritatively, "I'll send you." Roxanne pursed her lips in annoyance and tried to free herself from his grip. However, her effort was futile. Lucian noticed her intention, and he said with a solemn expression, "Are you really going to hail a taxi, dressed like that? Can't you see what the weather is like? You don't have to worry about me, Mr. Farwell. I can take care of myself," Roxanne replied coldly. That was when Lucian realized he had made his concern for her too obvious. He then furrowed his brows and said, "I doubt you can get a taxi now. By the time you get a taxi, you'll be late for the banquet." Hearing that, Roxanne turned her head to check out the street. He's right. Neon Boutique is in such a secluded area, and the road barely has cars passing by. Heck, I don't even see it tearing this area unless I walk further down the road. Even so, I don't want Lucian to give me a ride. Roxanne then turned her head back toward Lucian. When she was about to say something, her phone suddenly rang. Roxanne frowned and raised her gaze toward Lucian. In response, Lucian slowly let go of her wrist. Roxanne whipped out her phone and saw that it was Jasper calling her. When she answered the phone, Jasper uttered in an uplifted tone. "Dr. Jarvis, where are you? The other business partners are already here. Even Mr. Lynch has arrived, and he said he's eager to see you." Roxanne checked the time right after that. Although the banquet is not starting anytime soon, Mr. Ziegler said Mr. Lynch has already arrived. "I can't let Mr. Lynch wait for me for too long." After some hesitation, Roxanne forced a smile and answered, "Please inform Mr. Lynch I'll arrive in a while." In response, Jasper acknowledged her request with a chuckle and hung up the phone. Roxanne stared at her phone as the screen dimmed, and she felt troubled. This trip to Summer Bank is full of surprises. Initially, I thought the most I need to do was just to attend the banquet. However, not only did I bump into Lucian, but it turns out Mr. Lynch is also invited to the banquet. I've already rejected Mr. Lynch as a mentor the last time around. If I were to let him wait for me, it would seem impolite. With that in mind, Roxanne steeled herself and said to Lucian, "If you don't mind, please give me and Mr. Farwell." She was just avoiding me moments ago. Not a smile appeared on Lucian's face when he recalled how Roxanne had suddenly changed her aliend. "Well, since you've changed your mind, Ms. Jarvis, it's my honor to give you a ride." With that, he turned around and led her to his car. Upon getting into the car, Roxanne told the driver her destination. "Please take me to Blossom Hotel." The driver was arranged for Lucian by his potential business partner, so they didn't know each other personally. Hence, the driver thought Roxanne was Lucian's female partner for the evening when he saw the both of them getting into the car. "Wow! They look like a perfect match." The driver was briefly stunned by what Roxanne said. Without thinking too much about his reply, he instinctively answered, "That's exactly where we're going." For some reason, the temperature in the car plummeted after the driver finished his sentence. The driver subconsciously shuddered when he felt the change of mood in the car. After that, he just started driving. Meanwhile, the two people in the back seat had different expressions on their faces. Roxanne frowned and looked at Lucian suspiciously. How could there be such a coincidence? Didn't Mr. Ziegler say all the attendees are prominent figures in the pharmaceutical industry? Farwell Group isn't involved in the industry in any way, so why is he invited? Naturally, Lucian noticed she was looking at him unfazed. He turned toward her and said, "It seems like fate has brought us together." Hearing that, Roxanne's expression froze. She then pursed her lips and kept mum throughout the entire journey. The car then slowly came to a halt at the entrance of Blossom Hotel. When they arrived, it seemed like the banquet had already started because there were a bunch of luxurious cars parked in front of the hotel. Seeing that, Roxanne grew anxious, and she wanted to rush into the hotel after getting out of the car. With a frown, Lucian asked coldly, "Is this how you show your gratitude, Ms. Jarvis?" Roxanne halted in her tracks and turned toward him with a puzzled look. After some hesitation, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Farwell." With that, she turned around to leave. In a sarcastic tone, Lucian asked again, "That's all, Ms. Jarvis?" Roxanne was feeling anxious and helpless at the same time. However, she maintained her composure and answered. What would you like me to do, Mr. Farwell? I don't have the time to treat you to a cup of coffee now. The last time Lucian did her a favor, she showed her appreciation by treating him to a cup of coffee. Obviously, she didn't have the time for that. Lucian flashed an ambiguous smile and walked toward her. What I want will not take up any of your time. It's just that I need a female partner for the banquet. If you don't mind, please accompany me, Ms. Jarvis. Hearing that, Roxanne pursed her lips and furrowed her brows without saying a word in response. If I accept his request, the others will surely misunderstand our relationship. However, I know Lucian well enough to know that if I don't do as he says, he's not going to let me off the hook so easily. Besides, even if I were to reject him, he's still going to make the others think we are involved with each other. I might as well just accept his request and lay out some ground rules. At that thought, Roxanne agreed to his request nonchalantly. When Lucian reached out his arm to lead her in, she ignored his gesture. In response, Lucian smiled and let her be. Hence, the two of them walked into the hotel side by side. The banquet was held on the second floor. Where they entered the place, everyone's gazes fell on them at once. That evening, one of them was dressed in white while the other one was dressed in black. Although they didn't act intimately with each other, everyone seemed to feel as if they were a match made in heaven. Just like that, they walked toward the center of the event with everyone's gazes fixated on them. Roxanne endured the weird looks the attendees were giving her and swept a glance at everyone there. Luckily, I don't see anyone from Horrington. She then heaved a sigh of relief inwardly. Still, she tried to distance herself from Lucian when they were walking together. Lucian knew what she was doing, so in response, he purposely did the exact opposite. Roxanne couldn't help but stop walking before flashing a forced smile at him. You have to socialize with the others, right, Mr. Farwell? I shall stay out of your way. With that, she slightly nodded at Lucian and walked in the opposite direction. Lucian's gaze darkened when he saw her making an escape. He didn't stop her because he didn't expect her to comply with his demand in the first place. He only asked Roxanne to be his female partner on a whim, and he didn't know she would end up agreeing to it. Could it be because we're not in Harrington? With that in mind, Lucian flashed a self-deprecating smile. Meanwhile, Roxanne walked away and arrived at a corner. She then raised her gaze and tried to spot Gerald in the crowd. Right then, a familiar voice rang out. Roxanne, are you and Mr. Farwell, as one of the leading figures of the younger generation? Larry was also invited by Ziegler Group. Since he was red at that time, he decided to attend the banquet. However, he was rather surprised to see Roxanne there. He was even more surprised to see her attending the banquet with Lucian. Roxanne frowned in exasperation. Not knowing where to begin, she merely said, "We met by coincidence downstairs." However, Larry looked doubtful. Seeing his expression, Roxanne relaxed her brows and said pleadingly, "Anyway, it's not what you think. It's impossible between me and him." She did not want anyone to misunderstand her relationship with Lucian. Seeing her sincerity, Larry smiled gently and stopped pursuing the matter. Instead, he said, "Mr. Lynch is resting upstairs, and Mr. Ziegler is keeping him company. They're waiting for you. Are you looking for them? Roxanne had been searching for them the entire day but to no avail. As soon as she heard Larry's words, she heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. Where are they? Can you please take me to them? I've got something important to discuss with Mr. Ziegler, and I need to apologize to Mr. Lynch. Larry gladly agreed. He brought her out of the banquet hall and headed upstairs. At the same time, Lucian watched them leave, looking deadpan. Rage was boiling in his heart. So, this Morrison chap is the reason for Roxanne's sudden change of attitude? And why are they going upstairs together? What are they trying to do? Mr. Farwell, the business partner called out warily. Lucian turned around with a gloomy look all over his face. The other party shuddered subconsciously, but still plucked up his courage to hand Lucian the agreement. Lucian scanned it and penned his signature. The more he thought about Roxanne, the angrier he felt. Just as the business partner was about to say something, Lucian turned around coldly and marched out of the banquet hall. Meanwhile, Roxanne followed Larry into a room. As soon as they stepped in, Gerald could be seen sitting in the main seat. At the same time, Jasper and a few men, who seemed to be of high status, were gathered around him, laughing while talking about something. They fell silent instantly when they saw Roxanne and Larry entering. Jasper got to his feet and introduced the duo to the others. This is Dr. Jarvis, the doctor recommended by Mr. Queen. He then turned to Roxanne and introduced. These are the person in charge of the companies we will be discussing the collaboration with. Roxanne had a rough guess about the men's identity. She greeted the crowd, looking neither humble nor arrogant, and apologized. I'm sorry for making all of you wait. Gerald waved dismissively. We were just sitting around and waiting, anyway. It's nothing to worry about. Instead, you must be worried sick on the way here. I told them to not give you a call, but they insisted. Since Gerald had said so, the others too, chimed in saying that they did not mind the wait. Jasper clearly had a good relationship with Gerald. When the former heard Gerald's complaint, he smiled and said, I was just informing her about your presence. I didn't mean to rush her. Gerald merely laughed. Roxanne, too, smiled and followed Larry to find a place to sit. Soon, Jasper took the initiative to begin the conversation about the collaboration. Hence, Roxanne briefly explained the business proposal she had discussed with Colby. Surprisingly, Jasper agreed without hesitation and waited for the others to respond. However, the others appeared a little hesitant. Roxanne could not help but feel nervous. Just as she was getting anxious, Gerald's voice rang in the air. He gazed at Roxanne apologetically. I've heard the news about your research institute. I've always wanted to help, but I really don't have the power to do so. Though my words still have power, I'm just an academician. I'm clueless about the business world. I'm afraid no one will be convinced by me, even if I speak up for you. The moment those words left his mouth, the expressions of everyone in the room changed. Although Gerald focused on academics, the others in the room had business dealings in the medical industry. Many of them relied on Gerald's skills for a living. Gerald's words might sound like he was merely apologizing to Roxanne, but he was actually pressuring the others. Naturally, Roxanne understood the meaning Gerald was implying. She returned his gaze with a look of gratitude. It did not take long for the rest to agree. Clearly, Gerald's words worked. I've heard Mr. Queen talking about how impressive Dr. Jarvis' skills are. And now, we've witnessed how Mr. Lynch admires Dr. Jarvis. I guess there's no reason for us to hesitate anymore. I never thought Dr. Jarvis would be so young and a woman too. Not only that, but she also even runs a research institute on her own. She's such a strong woman. Words of praise kept traveling into her ears. Of course, Roxanne knew they were only praising her for the sake of Jonathan and Gerald. Regardless, it meant that the collaboration was sallied. At that thought, Roxanne patiently thanked them for their praises. As the organizer of the banquet, Jasper could not keep staying in the room. Before leaving, he asked Roxanne, "Would you like to come with me, Dr. Jarvis? I can introduce you to the people involved in Summer Bank's medical industry." Roxanne accepted the offer, got up, and excused herself from Gerald's presence before returning to the banquet hall with Jasper. Larry, on the other hand, stayed back to keep Gerald company. It was evident that Jasper was quite influential in the medical industry of Summer Bank. As soon as he made an appearance, many people approached to greet him. Jasper returned their greetings and introduced Roxanne to them. After socializing for some time, Roxanne felt a little tired. Thus, she excused herself to get some rest. Jasper smiled and nodded in agreement, taking her to the couch at the corner of the hall before returning to the crowd. When she finally settled down, Roxanne instinctively scanned the crowd. She caught no sight of Lucian. It was when she retracted her gaze that she realized what she did. Immediately, an odd feeling rose in her heart. She, too, had no idea why she looked for him subconsciously. Maybe I'm just worried he'll come looking for me again. Roxanne convinced herself, despite feeling conflicted. Suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of her. For some reason, Roxanne tensed up, thinking what she feared had actually happened. There were traces of panic on her face when she lifted her head. When she caught sight of the person in front of her, she calmed down and spoke slowly. "Who are you?" A big and tall man stood in front of her. His broad figure seemed to be enough to cover her completely. Realizing she was looking at him, the man smiled, raised his glass at her, and introduced himself. "Hello. I'm Joseph Cadman, the youngest son of the Cadman family. May I have the honor of making your acquaintance?" The Cadman family was a relatively reputable family in Summer Bank. Hence, Joseph did not bother revealing much about himself. He merely stared at the woman in front of him confidently after stating his request. He was a little late to the event. By the time he spotted Roxanne, she was being brought around the hall by Jasper to meet the guests. He eavesdropped on some of their conversations. Roxanne's beauty and outstanding skills left an itch in his heart.